Everyone, it's Grandmama. Time for another story from a hometown scrapbook. Tonight's story, Cosmopolis, the county seat. Hello there. We're going back into local history tonight to dig out an obscure character who played a colorful and picturesque part in the early days of Cosmopolis. His name, Raoul Nims, and his exploits are legion and marked with a touch of true frontier promoter and the builder of a real dream city. For if it had not been for Raoul Nims, there might never be the city on the site of Cosmopolis, and the dream of pioneers that went back to the very beginnings of the pioneers settling in our country would have gone for naught had it not been for the persistence of this builder and doer. As you may recall, we talked about the story of Cosmopolis once the first plat of the city was filed in 1861, and the name was coined, meaning World City, by old Sam James, the father of the James family that gave their name to the big red rock down the harbor from Hoquiam. But nothing came of Cosmopolis. Few intrepid families moved down and whacked a clearing into the wilderness, but nothing sprang up to give it high ground on the bend in the river or the look of a town. Not until the year of 1883, when a man named Raoul Nims blew into the northwest, scanned the area, and picked Cosmopolis for the place to light. He bought out the owners of the original town site and announced for the benefit of Portland, Tacoma, and Seattle newspapers that there was to be the greatest city in Grays Harbor called Cosmopolis. He began to put up some buildings and to slash away a clearing for the first addition to the town. But he was not skilled in business of building a city, and he had things to learn. There was, for example, the case of George Emerson, a case that might have changed the whole map of the harbor had it turned out differently. George Emerson came up to Grays Harbor the summer of 1880 and went searching for a site to locate a sawmill. He had a mill in South Bend that he operated for A.M. Simpson, and he wanted to locate one on Grays Harbor. He looked things over and decided that either of the two sites would be suitable. One at the mouth of the Hoquiam River and the other on higher ground at the bend at the Chehalis where Cosmopolis now stands. He made a mental note of the later, but made the Hoquiam site his first choice, and after buying the old James home site, erected a mill that gave Hoquiam its first industry. But Emerson did not forget the site up the river, and in 1883, when Nims had acquired the town site, he was starting to open it up to settlement, and he had talked with Nims about the location for another mill. It would have been just about where the Grays Harbor Commercial Company was later erected. But the price that Nims wanted and the price that George Emerson wanted to pay were widely separated. And the end result was that Emerson decided against the mill and kept his project at the mouth of the Hoquiam River, and Cosmopolis lost its first chance for the first-rate industry. But Nims, whatever his judgment, was a doer, and before his rapid promotion, he went up to the St. Charles Hotel, the Riverside Hotel, and the town's first store. It was to be operated by William Nims and the man named Stockton, and it was to become the harbor's first all-around trading center. The building faced the river on Cosmopolis's front street, and while it was not a large building, it stocked everything from ox yokes to carbonic needles. And under Nim's furious promotion, Cosmopolis became an entity on the salt water, the first that Grays Harbor could boast. But the tall, slender man with a mustache and the driving personality was not satisfied. He held that the town was platted too small, and within the first months of the land boom of 1884, when Sam Ben was running lines through his pasture to create a city, a man named Parson was platting a little town of Wishkah across the river. Rural Nims decided to increase Cosmopolis by another 40 acres. He cleared, platted, and filed in Montesano the second plat of the city, larger by the 40 acres, and sat back and watched the land-hungry Easterners grab it up, and they did. The promoter of Cosmopolis had been a banker back in Nebraska, and he had contacts throughout the Midwest. And to those contacts, he sent glowing accounts of this community, whose very name meant World City, and whose location was perfection itself, and they began to come. Nim sold business lots, home sites, and industrial sites. His hotels prospered, his store did a thriving business, and a one-time banker, Nims became a man of some means. And then he set about building a home befitting the father of a world city. He hired an architect to prepare drawings of a house that must incorporate everything fine. It must be large, too. The promoter of Cosmopolis had 5 children, 3 sons and 2 daughters, and there must be room for all of them. And the plans that the architect turned out was by all standards everything that Nims expected. It was a grand 3-story house with a tower on one corner, with balconies front and back, where 5 fireplaces and a veranda in front would wind around the face of the house. It was illuminated with great windows, many with trimmed panels of colored glass. The floors were hard wood, the hearths of glazed green tile, the fireboxes of fire pieces that were brought all the way from Minneapolis. It was such a house as would have stopped the shays of admirers in Seattle, Portland, or even eastern cities. And down here in the harbor, a wild and primitive frontier settlement, it was the most amazing thing anyone had ever seen. People from the new settlement of Aberdeen and the little village of Hoquiam went up the river to Cosmopolis on Sundays just to see the house that rural Nims was building, and they looked and went away to tell their friends. Nims was proud of his house and even prouder of his family. Hadn't Kitty, the eldest daughter, won the silver baby buggy at the exposition in Philadelphia in 1875 as the most beautiful baby at the fair? And when the house was finished, the Nims family moved in with regal elegance and took their place as the select of Grays Harbor. It was now, as old-timers reckon, about 1892, and the last nails were driven just ahead of the Depression that began the last year and toppled some of the nation's greatest fortunes. It hit Grays Harbor broadside and left its effect. True, the little industrial towns were just beginning, and they met their problems with their own frontier way. One old-timer once told of buying a rowboat full of carrots for 25 cents the following spring. But along with the casualties, there was rural Nims. He had spread himself a little thin. Now he saw the tide of newcomers grow thin and almost stop. Property didn't move. Business for his enterprises was poor. But he had his roots pretty deep. If he could be said that anyone owned Cosmopolis, it was probably rural Nims, and he clung to his ventures for another 5 years. Then he gave up. He was now to move into the Chelan country, to start his promotion all over again, and to make himself as much a name in that part of the state as he had amongst the sawdust cities of the harbor. And for a few things would be better recalled than the campaign for the county seat. We told you once how Aberdeen and Hoquiam tried to move the courthouse to a spot between the two cities, and how Montesano and Elma defeated the movement with some high-caliber public relations. But perhaps you never knew that rural Nims once tried to make Cosmopolis the county seat and make a great story in the doing. It was back in 1886, before either Hoquiam or Aberdeen were incorporated cities. Nims was at the height of his glory in building a city called Cosmopolis. The town was booming, and its promoter decided it was time to start a newspaper. Now, in those days, newspapers had to have causes. A paper wasn't started as a public service. It either espoused a political cause or had an issue to promote, or an axe to grind, or else it didn't start. But Nims had an issue. He had succeeded in getting the issue of the location of the county seat placed before the voters for an election to be held on the 16th of March, 1886. He felt that the newspaper was essential to further the cause, at least to equalize the influence of the Chehalis County Viaduct, then the only newspaper published in the county, which of course was solidarily in support of Montesano to retain the county office. On March 9th, Nims published his paper, the Chehalis County Recorder, and he threw the challenge right into the teeth of the Montesano supporters. Montesano had the only school of what might be termed higher learning. It had an academy. Nims pointed out that if Montesano kept the courthouse, it could hardly expect the people of the county to send their children to the academy school. The reasoning was a little obscure, but the paper made it clear that it was, of course, completely impossible. The Riverside Hotel is the best in Chehalis County, trumpeted the recorder. Is that sufficient reason why the county seat should not go to Cosmopolis? Then vote for Cosmopolis, said the paper. Chehalis County voters have at last discovered the tender babe which the viaduct cannot see. Cosmopolis, said Nims. On March 16th, they will select this tender suckling to rule over them. The paper set the price per copy of the newspaper as a vote for Cosmopolis and finished its editorializing about the prospects of the world city with the legacy conclusion of poetry. No, Cosmopolis didn't get the county seat by vote that day, and that paper, Volume 1, Number 1, was the only edition of the Chehalis County Recorder ever edited by Nims, as far as I can learn. But although Nims left Grays Harbor along about 1897, he was not to be forgotten. His great and elaborate house stood vacant for a time, and finally, the new doctor in Cosmopolis, Dr. H.C. Watkins, acquired it to use it as a hospital for the Grays Harbor Commercial Company workmen. That sprawling industrial institution was now a fixture in the town and growing fast. And now the new doctor lived there with Mrs. Watkins, and the sick and injured from the commercial company plant were mended in its spacious rooms and sat convalescing before its many fireplaces. It was the most magnificent house on Grays Harbor until the 1930s. The doctor told me the other day, nothing like that was built before, and few have been built since to match the Nims mansion for sheer elegance. The doctor admitted that the basement might have been built better. It was in the days of porous concrete, before the secrets were known for making dense concrete to keep the water out. After every rain, Dr. Watkins recalls, he had to bail out the basement with 5-gallon cans. But it had centralized heating, probably the first in the county. A giant hot water heating plant roared and snorted in the basement and devoured great slabs of wood. About 1904, Dr. Watkins was ready to give up, and Dr. Paul Schmitz of Aberdeen bought the structure and moved it over to Aberdeen on a scout. Do you place it now? It stood for 35 years on the corner of Heron and K Street, across from the Morick Hotel. Lloyd Flower had his photography studio in it. It was a lodging house and a boarding house, and finally it gave way to the wrecker's hammer to make way for Goldberg's annex. Nor is the name of rural Nims now gone from our records. On the contrary, it is very much the part of Cosmopolis as it appears on maps, and will forever be part of the history of the little town. For rural Nims was a promoter that built the town there, and told the world about it, and planned big things, and looked far ahead, and has had a prominent place in this, our hometown scrapbook. Thank you for listening.